Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Hockey Sense. I'm Chris Peters. It's episode 83 of the podcast. So glad you could join us for it because we've got a very special episode for you today. It's our NHL Draft Rankings episode. Yes, the draft rankings are here. We're going to talk about them on the show. No Q&A today, just talking about the rankings, some of the notable players, some of the reasons why I may have ranked players a certain way. And I just think that that's our best way to kind of go forward here with this episode. The NHL draft is less than a month away. It's hard to believe. It always seems like it's such a marathon, and then you get to the last month and it's a bit of a race. And I'll be heading to the NHL Scouting Combine coming up next week in Buffalo, and we'll talk about that next week. But today we're going to talk about the NHL draft rankings. You can find those rankings on FloHockey.tv. You make sure you can get that there. It is 1 through 100 for this draft. I'll also later on have a late round sleepers and notable players that I like for later in the draft. That'll come out a little bit closer, and a ton of draft content coming your way on FloHockey. So if you haven't yet, make sure you get over to FloHockey.tv, download the Flow Sports app. You'll be able to see all of our articles and read about the draft rankings, and that is what we're here to talk about today. Before we get to that, I do want to mention that the ECHL's Kelly Cup final will start this week on Flow Hockey. You can subscribe and watch the Florida Everblades take on the Idaho Steelheads in an epic battle for ECHL supremacy, and that starts on June 3rd. So make sure you are subscribed to Flow Hockey. You can access that on a variety of television apps and also the Flow Sports app itself on your mobile phone. And it's been a great postseason, the ECHL. I've really had a blast watching it and tracking it. Two very good teams, Idaho, the regular season champion, Florida, the defending champion from last season. And how about that? The Florida Panthers and their ECHL affiliate, the Florida Everblades, in their respective championship series. So pretty good time to be a hockey fan in Florida. All right, let's get to the matter at hand and the NHL draft rankings, because I think that is what you are here for. It's what I spend my entire year on. And we're going to start at the very top of the draft. And I'm going to bet that you can't guess who my number one prospect is. There's no way. I'm going to shock you right now. You're not going to believe it. It's Connor Bedard, the guy that's been number one all season long. And he only solidified that. He's been done playing for a couple of months now. And he is slated to be at the Scouting Combine. Looking forward to seeing what he ends up doing there. Obviously, he's a bona fide number one pick. He probably doesn't have to do the physical testing. Maybe he won't. We don't know that yet. But he'll interview with a couple of teams, and certainly we expect the Chicago Blackhawks to take him first overall. So Connor Bedard is the number one prospect on the list for the top five. And I got to tell you, that's the easy part. After that, it gets a little bit harder, but for me, I still think number two is pretty easy. We've talked about him a lot the last couple of weeks. Adam Fantilli is number two on my list. I do believe he's the best option for the Anaheim Ducks to take him. I think the thing that makes him special in this class is not only the speed and the skill, but that mean streak that he plays with, that highly competitive edge, which is so difficult to bring out of the top end players. You don't see that all the time. And I think Adam Fantilli, that's never had to be coaxed out of him. He plays with that edge, and that's a good thing. I think that still matters in the NHL. It's not like he's going to be a physically intimidating presence, but he's going to play hard, and he's going to play in all situations and in all areas, and that's what makes him special. He just won a gold medal with Canada at the Men's World Championship. Decided to go. He scored a critical goal and a beautiful goal if you haven't seen it yet. For Team Canada, IIHF semifinal, he scores the big go-ahead goal, and that allows them to move into the championship game where they ended up beating Germany, who upset the United States. And so Adam Fantilli now has a World Junior Gold, a World Championship Gold, and a Hobey Baker, as well as a Big Ten championship. So he's had quite a decorated year, and now we fully expect him to get his name called as early as second overall. And certainly he is number two on my rankings. So the top five includes, now you've got Connor Bedard and Adam Fantilli. Well, here's where things got more difficult for me. For a good chunk of this year, my number three player was Matvei Michkov. However, on my final rankings, it's Leo Carlsson. Why is it Leo Carlsson? We talked about him last week quite a bit. He's got size, he's got skill, he's got high-end hockey sense, and he's a center. He's a big center, a guy that could be a number one center. And when you're looking at a center versus a wing, as brilliant as a goal scorer as Matvei Michkov is, and as much as I like the player in terms of his skill set and his superstar potential, I do think Leo Carlsson has the potential to be a number one center in the NHL. Played for Sweden at the Men's World Championship at the center position. And to see him do that with Lucas Raymond, played with Jonathan Berggren, he played with Alex Nylander, he made those guys better. They made him better. They all complemented each other. He showed his maturity. He showed his decision-making. I believe he scored 3 goals in the tournament as well. And on top of that, had one of the great draft-eligible seasons in SHL history. So this is a guy that's put together a tremendous year. He also doesn't have that risk factor that comes with Michkov, which isn't just the Russian factor, the contract factor, or anything like that. It's also the size. And, can Michkov impact the NHL game in the same ways that Leo Carlsson's going to be able to? Ultimately, I made the decision that I thought at the center position, if that is Leo Carlsson's long-term game, I think he has the hockey sense, the offensive capability, the size, all those different things that put together to make him a better option in that position. So I think that is a great place for Leo Carlsson to be. And number 4, it's Matvei Michkov. I do think that the gap between 4 and 5 is a little bit bigger, but not that big, not as big as it used to be, because I do have Will Smith at 5, who I'll talk about in just a second. But we've spent a lot of time on Michkov throughout this year. The things I want to make clear, when I make this list, I'm not making it with the idea of what are the risk factors that Michkov isn't going to sign. I don't think that that's necessarily a risk factor at all. Obviously, the geopolitical situation in Russia, that does create a risk factor. The fact that he's under contract for 3 more seasons does not bother me, because in the end, you're only losing 1 year, really. I mean, this is not a player that was going to be NHL ready next year. He might not be NHL ready the year after that. You're getting 3 free years of development for Matvei Michkov. That is why I think you're really only losing 1 year of what we would expect his potential NHL impact to be. Now, the other thing with him is I do think there's still a significant risk factor. He's not a big player. He's not an amazing skater. He's fine, but I do think that his hockey intelligence is among the best in this class. I think that his offensive awareness is among the best in this class. I think Connor Bedard and he are very neck and neck in terms of those kind of discussions. Tremendous shot, tremendous creativity, good hands, all those different things. That's what makes me believe that Matvei Michkov could be a superstar player. And it's easy for me to put him at 4. It's a lot harder for an NHL team that's picking at 4, 5, 6, 7 to say, we're willing to take on that risk. So I do want to recognize that. But Matvei Michkov, number 3 prospect for me, or number 4 prospect for me, rather, right after Leo Carlsson. And that moves us into number 5. And we'll go through the top 15 here. I'm going to take a little break between the 5 and the 15, but we also want to talk a little bit about some of the guys that will be available later. And I also want to give you a little bit more insight into the process of creating these draft rankings as well, because I think that's something I do get questions about. And it is something that I think is good to be transparent and things like that. But as I go into number 5 here, I think it does get, to me, I think that the 5 is now more defined. I do feel like Will Smith has moved decisively into that 5th spot. He's been there for a while for me. I think that he's been a guy that I expected to be part of the top 5 conversation throughout this season. He's made significant strides in his own development. He's gotten physically stronger. He's become a bit of a better skater. It's still not a huge strength of his, but I do think he's one of the more dynamic, creative players in this draft. He's got tremendous puck skills, elite vision, great distribution ability. I think there was some concern about his compete level coming into the season. I didn't see that as big of a risk factor. I do think there are teams that aren't 100% sure if he has the size to play center at the NHL level. I do think that he's going to physically mature more. He still has room to grow into his frame. He can get stronger. And I still think that he could be a play driving center in the NHL. I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion for teams that are debating between Matvei Michkov and the rest of the field, how much of a discussion it really is. I think we could see a guy like Will Smith go as high as 3 in this draft. I don't think we'll see him go 2, but I do think we can see him go as high as 3 in this draft. It's not out of the question. Having the Columbus Blue Jackets with this need at center and wanting skill and wanting some somehow, to have that guy. I don't think they've really ever had a player like him. That's what I'm really looking forward to seeing Will Smith in terms of his overall development. Can he get to that level where he can be a top tier center? Now, I think Leo Carlsson, the reason that I have Smith, fifth and Leo Carlsson third and Fantilli second, and I think that there's a little bit less certainty, and there's never any real certainty when we're talking about players that are, years away from their development. But I think Will Smith is a guy that has a little bit of a longer development timeline ahead of him, even though he was so good at the under 18s this year with 127 points. I do think that he still has time to develop and needs to get stronger, better, needs to refine his game a little bit more, needs to take a fewer, some fewer individualistic chances and more, distribution, because he has those capabilities. I really do think that he has those skills, and those are the things that I like about his game overall. So Will Smith, very, very good player. I do think that he's going to be a center at the NHL level. I think he's going to be a play driver, and I think he could be an impact player down the road. But again, I think we're looking at least a 2-year NHL timeline. There's a potential that he could be one and done in college, but that's very infrequent anymore. We're seeing more guys stay for the 2 years, and I think that's probably the best path forward for him, so that he goes straight into the NHL after his sophomore season. I just like the player a lot. I've liked him all season long. You can check out our features on Will Smith. We have multiple pieces on Will Smith on FloHockey.tv, including a video just that really explains, how he approaches the game, the things that matter to him, what his teammates think of him. And, I think he's certainly proven it this year that he's among the top tier players. But that's the top 5. You got Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, Leo Carlsson, Matvei Michkov, and Will Smith. And that is the top 5 of FloHockey's first ever NHL draft rankings and the final draft rankings heading into the draft. And it's been my pleasure to create that, put that through. But as I've done that, I did want to take some time to go through the process. And the process of ranking players, I don't think that my process of going about a ranking has changed. My process of evaluating players has changed. The way that I weight certain things. And I was asked this recently on a radio interview about, how has your process changed? And the thing is that, I think the one thing that has been a constant throughout my entire time, and certainly even more so now, is that hockey sense and that catch-all term. I know it can be a little bit wonky to figure out, but what I think is important with that, with hockey sense, is, trying to define it is difficult. But to me, I've said this before on the podcast, I'm going to say it again. It's vision, anticipation, feel for the game, timing, space, those different things. Being able to, identify the correct outlets, being able to absorb pressure, feel that pressure, make the right play off of it. The ability to anticipate where the puck's going to go, the ability to anticipate where the play is going to go, how, and that manifests itself differently in different players. Defensive players, how are they on their, do they know when to step up on the gap? Do they know when to close off? Are they good with the angling and just understanding time and space well enough to know when they have to cut off a player or when they have to make that outlet pass? I mean, those are the types of things that hockey sense encompasses. And if you don't have that, if you're not able to process the game quickly enough, if you're not able to keep up with the mind, because the hockey sense can make up for a lack of foot speed, a lack of size, a lack of tremendous hands. Can you at least, you still need to execute off of that, but do you at least have the wherewithal to know what to do and when to do it? And that is very difficult to define. It's difficult to track, but I do think that this is going to be a very, that will always be the most important thing. The show is called Talking Hockey Sense, and it's, talking sense, blah, 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 but hockey sense is the most important thing. And that's why we talk about it so much. But that's a big thing. I think skating has become a much more important component. However, as important as skating is in hockey, what we've seen is guys like Jason Roberts and, guys like even that Matthew Tkachuk was not, he was panned for his skating. So was Brady Tkachuk. I always thought their skating was okay. Like, it wasn't amazing, but it was fine. It was good enough. But, those are the types of players where, they just have such tremendous hockey sense that it doesn't matter as much. But being able to play fast, is thinking the game fast, moving pucks quickly, but it can also be skating quickly. And I do think that these players, um, that we're seeing in these draft classes, you know, skating is such an important component to the modern NHL. The game is only getting faster. The players need to be able to move. It's especially important for a defenseman to be a good skater. I think it's harder and harder for defensemen that have weak skating ability to make it in the NHL. And so that's something that absolutely comes into play every time we talk about these players. And so skating is a big thing. Skill is another thing that's important to me. And I think it used to be more important because good hand skills, good one-on-one ability, the ability, being able to handle the puck. I think the thing that I've taken into a much greater account when it comes to puck handling and puck skills is how does a player receive a pass? How does a player distribute the puck? How does a player, what does the release look like on the shot? Different things like that. I mean, the shot is ultimately part of puck skills. We usually separate it out. For me, it's certainly a major part of the discussion process. You look at Connor Bedard, and there's nobody that shoots a puck like him. So, that's that. And that shot makes him unique in the class. Then you've got a guy like Michkov, who's able to make all these different plays. Will Smith, who has great one-on-one ability. Those are all important things. So skill is important. It'll always be important. It allows those players to execute at a higher level. But you can be a small player with skill. You can be a slow player with skill. And you can be, a not so smart player with skill. And if you aren't, having that skill does not make up for the other things. So that's why skill is moved further down the list in terms of priorities, but it's still a very important factor. The other thing that I think has really come into my process for ranking players is context and precedent. Um, Historical precedent helps. I, I always use Alexander Barkov as a tremendous example of how understanding context allows you to better evaluate a player. The first year I ever did a draft rankings was the Barkov draft. It's Nathan McKinnon, Seth Jones, Jonathan Drouin. And I had ranked Barkov, I think like 6th or 7th that year. And part of it was because he was like, wow, he had this great season in Finland, but I'm not sure if he has the upside. He's got the big frame. He's always been bigger. Of course he was going to be fine, but he had a historic season in Finnish hockey. He had one of the most productive seasons for a player of his age in the history of that league. And understanding that would have provided greater context to me about how special what he did in Finland was. So that's when points and different things like that, yes, they matter to a certain extent, but they don't matter without context and without seeing how a player, did that. How did they create those chances? How did they get those points? So you have to combine those things. But having a better understanding of context, precedent. The other thing and this is something that, when I've had conversations with my pal Corey Proman, and of course, we have multiple conversations on the Athletic Hockey Show on our prospect series there. We talk about, is there anybody that looks like this player in the NHL? Is there anybody that has done that? Who are the players that are similar when it comes to size, when it comes to skill, when it comes to production? If we're saying, okay, well, this player, how many players that look like this player in the NHL? It gives you an idea of the risk factor, gives you an idea of the probability of a player like that reaching the NHL, which is ultimately when we're making these lists, we're trying to project players that are going to be in the NHL. We're trying to make sure that every player on our list we feel will get drafted or we feel should get drafted. And they'll ultimately make the NHL. That's what we're trying to do most of the time here. But I think that that's something that will continue, to develop. But that's part of the process. When it comes to ranking players, it's like the greatest either or if this then that, or would you rather? It's basically, would you rather the top 6 the top 6 forward or a top 4 defenseman? Would you rather a number 1 center or a number 1 defenseman? And those are the types of discussions that you have with yourself as you're making these lists. You're also thinking about the different things, like all of those skills that I came up with. Who are the best at these things and who does the most of those things well. And then, you start whittling your list down and you say, okay, well, this guy doesn't have that, but he has this, so I can put him here. That's kind of how that whole process works. It's inexact. It can be, it's obviously very subjective. It'd be nice to remove some of that subjectivity, but it's actually really hard to do it because, ultimately we're playing a bit of a guessing game here. But and one other thing about context that I forgot to mention is also understanding development curves, development arcs, watching how players do. Like, did a player have a significant uptick in production this year? Was it simply because they got more ice time, or was it actually because they added more to their game? I think you look at a guy like a Will Smith, you say, well, his skating has improved some. He's able to get to the middle more. He added some strength. He needs to add more. Different things like that are important to contextualize where a player ultimately should go. But it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to get your arms around, but it absolutely, you gotta go in depth, and you have to try to be as rigid as you can with that in order to make these rankings. So when you see a player and you say, why is he here? You might not get the full explanation within the rankings, but you can always ask me and say, hey, why is this guy here? What did you think, about that? So I'm always available on Twitter at Chris M. Peters. You can yell at me there. All right, we're going to move on to the next group of players in the draft rankings. We're going to talk about the top 15, and then we're going to move on to the guys that I have in the late first round and the second round gems and the goaltenders, because I wanted to talk about those individually on this show. But today right now we're going to talk about number 6 through 15, because we have, we already mentioned Will Smith. So Will Smith's number 5, but then you got at number 6, Ryan Leonard. So on the same line as Will Smith, I think that he's been a big riser this year. The biggest thing that I needed to see from Ryan Leonard was his continued progression. Like, I had concerns that, was his hockey sense good enough to be, among, like, he played with 2 guys with elite level hockey sense in Will Smith and Gabe Perot. And I think that showed, it didn't show that Ryan Leonard didn't have hockey sense. What it showed is that, he was actually able to finish a lot of the chances that those guys created, and he created his fair share of chances as well. And then you start to see more and more as the season progresses and his numbers continue to go up, and he scores 50 plus goals at the NTDP. He wasn't simply a passenger. He wasn't simply a guy riding the coattails of 2 highly productive line mates. What he was the guy that was digging pucks out of the corners. He was the guy that was battling at the net front. He was the guy that was making the hit or taking the hit to make a play. And you constantly hear about high character player, high energy, high work ethic, incredibly skilled. He's 5'11", which is not in hockey terms, not big. He is a bull on skates, though, and he knocks guys over, and that makes a difference. And so I think that Ryan Leonard, of the players outside of maybe Adam Fantilli, he's the kind of guy that you put him in your lineup, people are going to be aware of him there, and he's going to make sure that they're aware of him every single shift. And then on top of that, he can score. So he's got skill, he's got speed, he's got strength, he's got a lot of those tools. I do think that he's going to be a top tier, top 6 forward, in the mold of the Brady and Matthew Tkachuk, but in a smaller package, because he's not quite as big as those two guys, but who have obviously made great strides. But I think that Ryan Leonard has a lot of potential. One guy who is bigger, and I think the size and the hockey sense are 2 of the key factors for me, with Matthew Wood. And so Matthew Wood comes in at number 7, played at UConn this year, was a point per game player. Another thing that helps solidify Matthew Wood as a top 10 and also a top 7 prospect for me in this draft, his sense of timing and space, I think, is so important. But not only that, he has the ability to go down and play down low, be hard to play against the net front, win battles in the corners. He's not going to be a physically imposing player, but he plays a heavy style, and he allows himself to get to the areas where he can score goals. He has soft touch on the puck, so that's good to see from a bigger player. The skating is a concern, absolutely, for me. I think that the skating is going to continue to be a concern. But again, I think this is where hockey sense, the physical strength, and then his ability to finish come into play. And that's why I think Matthew Wood is a top tier, potentially top 6 scorer in this draft. A guy that could be a big time goal scorer, a guy that's going to help make your team better with his offensive capabilities. I really like what he brings to the table. So he's got the size benefit, and then he's also got that hockey sense benefit. If you watch him play, he's just as liable to go dig that puck out of the corner as he is to kind of find the soft area of the ice, pop into space, and make himself a threat to score. And that's something that I think great goal scorers do at an alarming rate at the NHL level. Even though he's this behemoth, at 6'3" and strong, he still is able to kind of get lost in the offensive zone, and the opposing defenders don't get to him in time, and then he's able to score. And as we get, and I just want to say, as we move down this list, this is a tough list to put together, especially this year. I think the top 15, top 20, top 25, there's some really good players that end up getting left out of this particular process. But at number 8, I've got Zach Benson from the Winnipeg Ice. Benson has been a highly productive player in the WHL. He is not a big man. He is not an elite skater, but he has really good skill, high-end hockey sense, great vision. And the thing that I think separates him from other players, and the reason that I still have him as a top 10 pick despite size and skating concerns, is his effort level is off the charts. He is one of the best and most aggressive players at battling. Connor Bedard said earlier this season he was one of the toughest players to play against because he is never stopping. He is always on you. He's on pucks. He turns pucks over. He forces turnovers. He makes defensemen uncomfortable, not because he's going to put them through the wall, but because he's going to take the puck right off of them. And he does it often. And I think that's such an impressive trait of his. The motor is always running. He is, he's aggressive, and then he's smart on top of it. And you look at the production that he had this year on top of his ability to make those kinds of plays. I'm a big Zach Benson fan. I still believe he's a top 10 prospect. I think that, some of the guys, I feel a little more safer, a little safer projecting those guys in, top 6 roles. This is Benson, he's going to have some work to do. He's going to have to improve the skating. He's going to have to, be strong. But I do think that Zach Benson has a lot of the skills except for the height. That's really all. That's the only thing he's lacking for me. I mean, the skating is what it is. It's not, detrimental to his NHL projection, I don't think. It's not helpful, but it's not detrimental. And so I think that he has enough tools to be a guy that can find a role and be an impactful player at the NHL level. At number 9, we've got Dalibor Dvorsky, and I think his under-18 World Championship was one of the better performances that he had this season. He was able to show he can dictate games, he can take over shifts, he can make plays, and that was it. It didn't matter the opponents. He was able to do that, and he made those around him better. I think that showed his competitiveness. I think it showed his skill. He's a really gifted scorer. If you give him the time and the space, he's going to put it in. But I think he can also create time and space for himself. And I also think that he's improved his game off the puck. As he gets stronger, he'll only be better in those ways. But he's shown a commitment to playing off the puck, which I don't necessarily think was there earlier in his career, because this is a guy we've been talking about for the last 3 years. And while I don't think that he's the player we thought he was going to be necessarily 2 years ago, he's still a high-end player for this class, and certainly a guy that's going to make an impact down the road. Going to start running through these a little bit quicker now because, we finally have a defenseman at number 10, and it's David Reinbacher. Played in Switzerland this year. He's Austrian. He played at the Men's World Championship, got hurt, but he was able to come back. He is slated and invited to go to the scouting combine, so we'll see how if he's healthy enough to do the physical testing. But he's a 6'2" right shot defenseman with tremendous skating ability. I think the hockey sense is really good. His production at the pro level in Switzerland this year was outstanding. And that Roman Yossi's the only defenseman at his age that has scored more points than he had this season. And I think Reinbacher, while incomplete at this point, has the upside and is one of the few defensemen with the upside that I think projects more comfortably into a top pairing or top 4 role. And so there are not going to be a lot of defensemen taken in the first half of the first round. He's going to be the earliest defenseman taken. I think it is now consensus that he's the number 1 defenseman available, at least, industry. I'm sure there are some teams that have Sandin Pellikka or Tom Wielander or other players ahead of him. But I do think that David Reinbacher, for me at number 10, is worthy of a top 10 selection. At 11 and 12, we got a couple of teammates, Gabe Perot and Oliver Moore. And Gabe Perot is one of the smartest players in this draft. I think his vision is elite. His playmaking ability is high end. He's not an amazing skater, and he's not the biggest guy, but boy, does he have some creativity and understanding of how to create offense. I think, between him and Matvei Michkov and Connor Bedard, we're talking about some of the best brains in terms of how they think about offense, how they create offense, their anticipation, the way they read defenses. And, I think Gabe Perot, who 132 points in the national team development program this year. I mean, numbers that I simply never, ever, ever never imagined would be possible there. And he did it. He had multiple 4 or 5 point games where, sure, he's playing with Will Smith and Ryan Leonard, but he was making those guys better. I think if he was a little bit of a better skater, he'd be a top 10 pick, no doubt. But I do think, at 11, that's an aggressive enough place for me because of the size, and he doesn't always have the intensity. He doesn't, but I think it's just because he plays the game in a very poised way, and that's great to see. So I think that, he's a guy that is absolutely going to be, he'll be available in that range. I'll be interested to see where he ultimately goes. But I think Gabe Perot is an exceptional young talent and a guy that I have a lot of time for as an offensive player and a potential top 6 guy. And number 12, Oliver Moore, the best skater in the draft, explosive. I mean, he's basically a sports car on ice, the way that he is able to move. I think that his hands are starting to catch up to his brain, to his feet a little bit, because he's, he is moving so fast. So he has to process the game a lot faster. I'm sure there are times where he could potentially slow the game down a bit more. But I just think that skating tool that he has, and he has enough hockey sense that he's going to figure it out. I also think that he made some of the most, the strongest physical improvements among players in the class this year. Added weight, added muscle. He's very lean, but very strong, sturdy, hard to get off the puck. So, I think that that's hugely important to have an Oliver Moore that can absolutely wheel, that can play on the PK, that can play, he's good defensively, he's responsible. And then he's got that offensive ability, really good shot on him too, which, hopefully we'll get to see more. Last 3 here, bunch of CHL players. Nate Danielson, two-way center, high-end scorer, like his shot, like his ability to make plays. I think he's, just a very versatile player. He's got good size, good strength. Nothing super flashy about him, but he just is effective. He's at number 13. At number 14, a very skilled player in Braden Yeager. I think his hockey sense and his skating ability and his skill are all good enough. The skill is, outstanding. His vision is outstanding. He makes a lot of plays, produces at a high level, average size, but certainly a guy that as he gets stronger will be harder to knock off pucks. And then when we're talking about strength, it's hard not to talk about Colby Barlow from the Oshawa Generals and his ability to just really be just strong, sturdy, competitive, and then he can score. Really good shot on him, gets to the good scoring areas, gets into the corners, battles, competes. High character, as a guy that wears the C. Got a lot of time for Colby Barlow and what he's accomplished in his young career. So that's the top 15. So Ryan Leonard at 6, Matthew Wood at 7, Zach Benson at 8, Dalibor Dvorski at 9, David Reinbacher 10, Gabe Perot at 11, Oliver Moore is 12th, Nate Danielson 13th, 14th Braden Yeager, and 15th Colby Barlow. That is your top 15 of the FloHockey NHL Draft rankings. So make sure you go read those rankings to get more context as to why players are where, and you can also see the rest of the top 100. But I will summarize a little bit more for you before we get out of here. Excuse me. Wanted to talk a little bit about the guys that I think are going to go in the late first or early second round, as well as some of the other guys that I see more as second round gems for this class, because I think that is where a lot of people we've spent so much time on the top of this class. And that's why these draft rankings that go 100 or more deep, you're able to kind of see some of the other names that maybe aren't getting talked about in this setting as much. And I wanted to at least put a spotlight on some of those players. And that starts with a defenseman that we talked a lot about how this is not a great year for defensemen, but I think late in the first round, we're going to see a bit of a run on that next tier, because I think you've got David Reinbacher, Axel Sandin Pellikka, Tom Wielander. I think those are probably the most consistently top 3 guys. But then that next tier, you've got guys like this one, Tanner Mullendyke, who, played for the Saskatoon Blades this year. Incredible skater, just remarkably gifted skater. He's about 5'11", he's slightly below average size for an NHL defenseman, but the skating ability is elite. I think that he moves exceptionally well. On top of that, he's got good skill, but he didn't have great numbers this year. So we're going to wait and see. I think that that's why he is a little bit lower on a lot of lists, is that, he didn't really produce a ton this year. But I do think that the foundation of skills is there. I think his hockey sense is good enough. But, I also think that it's so important to have a defenseman that can skate, and there are a few in this class that skate better than he does. So I've got Tanner Mullendyke, as a high. I have him at 27th on the list, but that's a guy that I think could potentially slot into a top 4 down the road. And I think he plays the game much more, in line with the modern style NHL, which I think is so important. So a guy like Tanner Mullendyke, that's, late first round. I think we're going to see him go, possibly goes into the second round, but that's a player that I think a lot of teams are going to be keying on as the draft moves on into the late first day, early day 2. Like him a lot. The skating, again, a huge trait. I've talked about him on this podcast before. I've talked about him a lot throughout the draft season. I still have Charlie Stramel as a first-round prospect. I know that that's not necessarily the most popular opinion in the public sphere, but this is a player that I've been watching for 3 years, and I've seen his development. And while I was not impressed by what we saw this year at Wisconsin, I do think that he is going to be better in year 2. A number of players have had tough freshman seasons. Just so happens this is his draft year. There's a little more spotlight on it. Didn't produce. I think that there are times where I question his hockey sense, but I've seen too many things from him. I think he's an elite athlete. I think his athletic toolkit is outstanding. He's strong. He's got some snarl to him. He likes to play the body. He is going to find a role very easily on an NHL team, I think, down the road. Now, it could be a bottom of the lineup role, could be a top 3 line, a third line kind of situation, or maybe even a fourth line. But I do think he's going to be an everyday NHLer. I think he's going to make plays. I think he's going to provide scoring depth. And I do think that there's a lot to like about his overall skill set. He's got a good shot. He's a good skater. I think that he's starting to improve in terms of his ability to make a few plays. He can kill penalties. He's responsible defensively. He's versatile enough to find a role. And that's why I think that Charlie Stramel, for me, remains a first-round prospect. Now, I have him at 29th, so it's not like I'm putting a number 1 first-round pick with a bullet kind of stamp on him. But I do feel like he's a very good player, and I'm really excited to see what he brings to the table next year at Wisconsin under Mike Hastings, which I think will be great for his development. He's get pushed in a lot of different ways. He's going to find a way to make a bigger impact in year 2 at Wisconsin. Moving into some of those second-round picks, and these are guys that are kind of spread out. One of the guys that I feel like I'm a little high on, I know there are some that are even higher than I am, but I still feel like this is there's a risk reward here at number 38. Grayson Sachin from the Seattle Thunderbirds, and I think that he is one of the more unique puck handlers in this draft. I think, it's, as I mentioned, skill is on the list, but it's a little bit further down. But if you're a player that I think like him, where there's some good sense there, it's not elite hockey sense, but it's good hockey sense. It's the ability to make plays. There's creativity to him. The thing that strikes me about Grayson Sachin is how long he's able to extend plays, how long he's able to hold the puck on his stick, how many times he's able to extend a play to get away from a defenseman, to create that little extra opportunity or that little opening for a teammate and then find them. I think he's going to finish more plays next season when he's going to have to be relied upon at Seattle in a way that he wasn't this year. He's on a star-studded roster. It's hard to stand out in those teams, in those situations, yet Sachin still does it. And I've got a lot of time for him. I think he's a good player. I think he's going to be a really good, a guy with top 6, fringe top 6 potential. I think it's, more likely he's down the lineup a little bit. But I think he has good compete level. I think that he has the hockey sense. And I really do think the puck skills are high end. Moving down, and we go to a bit of a throwback, and this is number 41, Maxime Sterback, who I had as a first-round prospect at the beginning of the season after a few viewings at the very early stages of the year. Love the skating ability. I think that he makes a lot of good reads. I think he's a good defender. I think that he's gotten better in that regard. I think that his offense is going to come a little bit more. We're still waiting to see that. He is going to Michigan State. He's going to have an opportunity to play a pretty big role there. I think development-wise, that's going to be important going forward. But, man, I'll tell you what, Maxime Sterback, I think for me, it's all about upside with him. You watch the way that he played at the World Junior Championship. You watch the way that he played at the Under-18 Worlds. This is a player that is mature, that has a full understanding of what he needs to do. And I think he only got better as the season wore on. I think that the year in the USHL that he had with the Sioux Falls Stampede was massively helpful for his development. And I do think that, what he learned this year was, being more defensively responsible, making quicker decisions with the puck, and being decisive and being poised. And I think that those are things that he can be as he moves on. I think his offensive sense still needs a ways to go, and that's why I dropped him out of the first round. But at 41, that's still a player that I have a lot of respect for, and I feel very strongly that he's got a chance to make it moving through these next stages of his development. All right, a couple more of these I just want to get through. Carson Raykoff from the Kitchener Rangers. The reason I point him out, I have him at 44. I think he could be a lot higher. I think he could have been a first rounder this year. Excuse me. I think he could be a first rounder this year, if certain things went right. The thing about Carson Raykoff is, you didn't always see a consistent effort from him. You didn't always necessarily see his best every night. And when you're in your draft season, you have to be much closer to that more frequently. It's so important to have your best consistently. And that decreases questions about effort level, compete, all those different things. But the things that I know about Carson Raykoff is he's got really good size. I think his skating is fine. His skills are very good. He's got great, he's got top 6 skill. He's got an NHL frame. It's just a matter of finding that edge, finding that next step. And if he can get there, he has a chance to be a very valuable pick. I think that there's a chance he could be a very early second round pick. I just think there's enough risk there with the inconsistency that we saw this season in Kitchener that you can't put that first round stamp on him. And I don't think a team's going to. But I do think that an early second round pick, those are the types of guys where you say, we're going to get an NHL player out of this. I do think that he is that. And I think that that's where teams are going to go. So I do have him at 44th. At 52nd, I have Jaden Perron from the Chicago Steel. And Jaden Perron has been a bit of a polarizing prospect. I think he's been very popular in the public realm. He has been not as beloved in the scouting community, but I do think that his second half of the season, and particularly his playoffs, were eye-opening. He had to play the first round away with no Macklin Celebrini, and he managed to be, his team's leading player. He was driving play. He's got good skating ability. He's got good skill. He's got some dynamic elements, but he's not a big guy. Is he dynamic enough at his size to be able to produce at the NHL level? He's going to the University of North Dakota this year. He's got he's got plenty of time. He's got plenty of time to figure things out. Really like the player a lot. I think 52nd is high. I think 52nd is aggressive, but I know that there are people that think he should be a first rounder. And I'll tell you what, I think he competes well enough. I think he does a lot of things well. We'll see where he lands. I don't think that the scouting industry is as high on him as we are in the public realm, in the public sphere, or the list that you can read wherever. But I do think Jaden Perron has a lot to offer. And he didn't have a great start to the season, but I really liked how he finished it. And that's where I see him as a second round pick. A little bit further into the second round, this is another guy whose size is going to be a major concern. But I think between his skating and his skill level and his sense, Luca Pinelli has a real good opportunity to get drafted and to find a way. At 5'9", 5'10", he's not necessarily the biggest guy. He needs to get stronger physically, but I think he's got some tenacity to him. I think he competes. I think he plays well off the puck. He does enough. And the skill and the skating and the shot are all reasons that I have him in the second round, even though he is an undersized player. And there are enough, concerns, but I think he does enough well. And those are the types of players that, is there something special about them? And I do think that some of the things that he does, while I wouldn't call them necessarily special, are high end enough where I'd say This guy has the tools to potentially make it. And that's why, as a late second, I think he's worth a gamble there. All right, do want to move into goalies now. And goalies, this is an interesting draft for goalies. I don't have a goaltender slotted to go in the first round, but I have several in and around the second round. And I think there could be a run on goalies in the second round, which will be really interesting to track. And that'll be, to see how that affects everything. But as far as goaltenders go, we've got Michael Harabo as my number one goaltender coming in this year. Played for the Omaha Lancers. The numbers are not great, but you look at his size, 6'6", his athleticism, his technique, his competitiveness, all of those suggest to me this is a guy with starting goalie potential. It's hard to project a starting goaltender. There have been plenty of guys that we projected to go into the first round that, have struggled. But I would say that Harabo himself, excuse me, man, allergy season. I would say Harabo himself is really one of the guys I feel has the highest ceiling of any of the goaltenders. I think he's got all of the projectable traits, but with any goaltender you take, there is a significant amount of risk. There's a long development timeline ahead. There are a lot of different things that can happen. Harabo is slated. He was going to go back to Omaha for next season. It was just announced that he's actually going to enter UMass a year ahead of schedule. So he's going to go attend UMass next year. He's going to be playing college hockey. Based on their goalie structure, I think he's going to get a significant amount of games. I don't necessarily know if he'll get all the games or 75% of the games, but he's going to get enough games to get good reps. This is I think whatever NHL team takes him is going to be keeping very close tabs on him. And they're going to work with him a lot because there is so much there. And I think it would be very difficult. There's a chance that he goes in the first round. I didn't grade him as, rank him in the first round. But I think that he has, of the goalies, he's the guy that I feel has the best case for being a number one in the NHL. And that can be enough to get you picked. And I think he'll be an early second round pick. We've got Adam Guyan at number 52, played for the Chippewa Steel. He made a name for himself at the World Junior Championship. I think that he's one of the more athletic goalies. There's great quickness there. He's, highly competitive. We saw him he was a goal away from beating Connor Bedard in Canada at the World Junior Championship, and it would have been one of the most massive upsets, but he's the reason they were even in it. And I think that he is, he's a second-year eligible, played in the North American League this year. I'm not 100% certain if he's going to be going to Minnesota Duluth next year or if he's going to go to the USHL with Green Bay Gamblers have his rights. So we'll have to see where Adam Guyan ultimately goes for his next steps. But he came over to North America, took a chance. Great job by the Chippewa Steel in the North American League. Gets the opportunity, seizes it, and I think that he showed enough of those tools. So at number 52, he's in the number 2 goaltender on my list. At number 54, Trey Augustine from the national team program, lost 1 game in regulation all year. Wins and losses don't matter that much to me as a goaltender for goalie stats, but it is still wild that, he only lost 1 game in regulation this year. Backstop Team USA to a gold medal. Incredible preparation, incredible poise, calmness in the net. Checks a lot of boxes. Teammates love him, love playing in front of him. And he delivered for them this year, got the gold medal at the under-18 Worlds. He doesn't have the prototypical NHL goalie size, closer to 6'1", 6'2", but he is a goalie that I think, he has enough traits, and he also has the mentality. And he'll probably play a ton at Michigan State next year. So really good development path for him. At 65, we've got Carson Bjarnason from the Brandon Wheat Kings. I think size, technique, the ability to, hockey sense, all really good traits for him. I think some of his finish and just kind of making the stop and not giving up the big goal, still a couple of things that he needs to work out. But I think from a size, technique, athleticism package, I think that there's enough there to say, yeah, he's among the top goalies in this draft. At number 68, I've got Scott Ratzlaff. And so, we've got 6 goalies in the top 100, which is a lot for me. I try, it's not often that I'll have that many in there, but 6 of them are in there. And I've got Scott Ratzlaff at 68. Incredibly athletic, good feel for the game, not great size. But, I think that he is a competitor. I think he had a great showing at the CHL Top Prospects game, but beyond that, playing for Seattle this year, some really good starts. He's been in a platoon role with Thomas Milik, and so Ratzlaff is actually, oddly enough, the more popular goaltender, at least in scouting circles, even though Milik is still technically, he's a guy that, NHL teams could look at, and he's currently backstopping, Seattle to both a WHL title, and they're also trying to get to the Memorial Cup. So, or, going for the Memorial Cup as we record this. So, but Ratzlaff hasn't really been a part of that so much, but still, you look at the skills and the combination of things. I think he's played well enough to earn a shot, and I think there's a lot there. At 71, the last goalie on the top 100, but he very well could go earlier than this, is Jacob Fowler from the Youngstown Phantoms. USHL goaltender of the year, the most outstanding player in the Clark Cup playoffs, .952 save percentage in the Clark Cup playoffs this year. Youngstown wins their first ever Clark Cup. He's got the size, he's got technique, he's got incredible hockey sense. He makes everything look very easy, tremendous poise in the net. I think that the only things that he needs to really focus on, he needs to just continue to work on, his preparation and all of the, just some of the off ice stuff, being in better condition, and all those different things are going to make him that much better of a goalie. Now he's going to Boston College next year. He's going to be their number one goalie. I mean, they've got one of the best recruiting classes in the country. Can't wait to see what that looks like there. But Jacob Fowler, a very strong goaltender, really like what he brings to the table. And I tell you, I think that Youngstown, the season that they had, they're going to have quite a few players off that team selected in the draft, and they're going to deserve to go. And, Fowler is certainly going to be one of the earlier ones taken. Well, that's a summary. There's 100 different player capsules that you can read on FloHockey.tv. You can catch up with all of the draft rankings. You can get them all there. Also, stay with us throughout all the way to the draft. More content coming your way. Things like late round picks that I like, various studies on different players, a lot of video features. We're going to have video scouting reports for the first time on a number of players as well, mostly CHL players. Looking forward to that. So stay tuned to FloHockey, because we're going to have you covered for the 2023 NHL Draft with a lot of unique and different content, and hopefully well-informed content as well, as that's what we put the work in for. So, yeah, definitely check all of that out. Really looking forward to getting that to you here in these next couple of weeks. But, man, it's getting crazy right now. We'll also have a bunch of mock drafts and other things like that. So do not miss it. If you haven't yet, make sure you are subscribed to the FloHockey YouTube page, just FloHockey on YouTube. Follow us there. You can subscribe. You'll get clips from this podcast. You'll also get highlights and a number of original features. So make sure you're subscribed to that so you never miss a video when it comes out. And that's a great way to engage with this podcast as well. You can watch the podcast on FloHockey.tv or the Flow Sports app. That is available anytime. You can make sure that you can never miss an episode. And if you want to see this pretty face more than listen to it, by all means, go right ahead. And of course, we're always available on your app of choice, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you download and subscribe to Talking Hockey Sense. Leave a 5-star rating and review just to, help us out a little bit. It does. I'm telling you, I know I say this every single week, but I'm telling you right now, the more of you that do that, the better it is for this podcast. And if you really like it, or even if you hate it, let people know about it. You can either hate listen to it, or you can enjoy it, like so many of you that have left the kind 5-star rating and reviews have done. So we're having a blast, and we're only just getting started here. It's been a great year at FloHockey. We're coming down to the home stretch of the NHL Draft. Much more coming next week. I'll be previewing the scouting combine and also fill you in on the various things that I'm hearing from around the NHL Draft as it gets closer. We'll also have a mock draft to talk about, and so much more. Huge thanks to Amanda for producing today's show. A big thanks to all of you for listening. Please join us next week when we talk much, much more about the NHL Draft. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of Talking Hockey Sense. I'm Chris Peters. We'll catch you next time.